Learning the flute, 2003. Blackboard, it's an element that we use to learn to write, okay, and to learn to paint also.
I mean, the blackboard in learning the flute is interesting in that it started by chance. I knew I wanted to do the opera, but I didn't know how to do the opera. So I thought, all right, I will do the overture and use the overture as a way of learning a vocabulary. Mm-hmm. And I had to do an exhibition in Germany, in a small town in Germany, and there was a particular room which was full of wooden panels. So I couldn't I couldn't paint the walls, I couldn't put a screen there. I had to make a screen of my own. Mm-hmm. So I thought I would use a blackboard. I thought I would use a small screen. Then I thought a blackboard, but the difficulty with a blackboard is how do you project onto a black surface? Mm-hmm. And then I discovered, in fact, even though you're projecting onto a black surface, so when you put light on it, projector is adding light. It doesn't add white, it adds light to the blackboard. But that when you looked at it, you believed you were seeing white chalk on the blackboard. In fact, all you were seeing was the blackboard with some light on it. But your brain turns that extra light into white. So you're seeing a white chalk line. So that was the first kind of revelation, that one could work with projection on a dark surface rather than one normally thinks of a cinema screen as white, as a light surface to reflect the light. Then because when one worked with drawing white lines on a black background, you can either work with white chalk on a black piece of paper, or you can work, which is quite fat, because chalk is very crumbly, so you get a very fat line. It's difficult to get a bright white, fine line. Mm-hmm. But if one works the other way with charcoal, black line, you can do a fine black line easily on a white piece of paper, and then invert it, so you look at the photographic negative. So the white paper becomes black, the black line becomes white. And that's what we did. So a lot of the drawings were done on paper. Sometimes the drawings were done as negatives. So drawing with white paper as if you were drawing a photographic negative. So when you inverted it, it became a positive again. Like the drawing, in fact, on that wall there, is a drawing done as a positive drawing that is meant to be seen as a negative from learning the flute. So there were all of these things which are they're not just technical questions, they were strategies of making drawings, they were revelations about how projection works, they were thinking about drawing as if one was drawing a negative to see it positively, while listening to the music. And through that, the whole vocabulary and language of a photographic world, of photographic negatives and positives emerged, which is then finally on the blackboard. So it wasn't as if I knew what I was doing at the beginning. The blackboard became a surface, or the project became a surface for discovering what the larger project, the opera production, would look like.
Teatro Champs-Élysées, Avenue Montagne. Η πρόβα τζενεράλε για την όπερα «Ο μαγικός αυλός» του Μότσαρτ θα ξεκινήσει σε λίγο. Ο William Kentridge θα επιβλέψει τις τελευταίες λεπτομέρειες και εμείς θα δούμε ένα οπτικό αριστούργημα.
What is the main element that you are interested in the magic flute?
I'm interested in its position as an optimistic Enlightenment opera. And the whole question of the Enlightenment, which in a way is the extrapolation, right, of the very first metaphor of Plato, of Socrates' myth of the cave. In a way, for me, that's been the central metaphor of Western philosophy from the era of Plato onwards, in which the Enlightenment takes it, as it's called, the Enlightenment, about light, bringing light to darkness, which is also the colonial metaphor, bringing light to what they call the dark continent, to Africa. And it's always been an ambiguous process. From Plato, with the authoritarian head of the Republic, the philosopher king, to the philosopher king of Robespierre at the time that Mozart was writing the Magic Flute, to the Pol Pots who would have seen themselves as the philosopher king at that time, to that vexed question of what is the relationship between violence and knowledge. Authoritarian, between having a monopoly of force to impose something. There's an ambiguous and difficult and unresolved relationship of knowledge and power and violence. And so I think the opera is a particular beacon in that. It's the optimistic moment when everything seems possible, where you could have a benevolent philosopher. And in a sense, from there, it goes downhill very quickly. So I think that was my interest. That's one of the interests in the opera. And the opera is also very much about the relationship of light and darkness, the queen of the night of darkness. In Mozart, it has to do, as in Plato, it has to do with the triumph of light. And for me, the bright light is simply the end of the film, when you've run out of film in your projector and you just have the naked light bulb and there's nothing to understand. And our only hope is this mixture of the darkness and the light, of the not knowing and the knowing. So there's a philosophical interest in the deep structure of the Magic Flute, which goes back to Plato and which comes back to where we are now.
How do you feel in this specific moment of the world, Mr. Kentridge, as an artist? I mean, many people say that we are living in an age that we cannot have art, we cannot have poetry, we cannot have literature, we only can have financial results and things like this, which is absolutely false.
But I think it's interesting, there was a way in which, after the end of the Cold War, during the great financial bubbles of the 90s and all the way through, there was a sense of bankers and hedge fund managers and financial people saying they knew the answer to the world. They understood stuff that those of us who did not know what a derivative was couldn't understand. And even though it's catastrophic in many ways for individuals who will lose pensions, whose jobs will disappear in many parts of the world, from the financial collapse, one of the results is that there isn't the belief anymore that bankers have the answers, that they in fact are the new philosophers, that everything else is secondary in fact to their understanding of the world. We understand the disastrous condition that confidence in them has put us in now, and that although it makes it much harder to make work, in the sense there's not the largesse of the state funding a lot of arts projects and there are fewer philanthropists doing it, in a sense it opens up a space for people to understand that those technocratic answers were not answers. And that answers to things that are more fundamental will have to come from where they've always come. From writers, from philosophers, from poets, from artists, from musicians. So it's a relief, but obviously it comes with a very immediate cost of difficulty for many people working in the arts and many, many more people working in their daily life.
Yeah. And how is the daily life in Johannesburg, to finish with that?
Well, the daily life in Johannesburg, in one sense, we are one level protected from the crisis in the Eurozone and from American banks. We had better credit rules and a very good tax collection system and not the same kind of scale of... But because we're a peripheral economy, if the big economies of the world get into crisis, it just reaches us a year later and we still, exports go down, fewer tourists, all of these things. So we will feel it. We will certainly feel it. We come from not from a legacy, we come from a history of huge unemployment, 40% unemployment. So there are big crises, big problems still to solve. There was the feeling in the late 90s that Europe and America had solved their problems and that we still had our enormous problems in South Africa. Now there's a sense of camaraderie that you two in Europe also have the kind of, are going to be dealing with huge questions of unemployment, with inadequate infrastructures, with state resources that can't solve it. And part of us thinks, well, welcome to the world. That's the way we all live. That's the way the world is. There was Europe and America had this illusion that they were exempt from it.
I think that you will never leave Johannesburg you would not like to live in Europe or in America.
All I can say is that if after 56 years I still am in the same town, the same village, the same suburb, there's obviously something there which makes me not want to leave.
That's wonderful. And we thank you very much. Can we hope that you will come in Athens?
Yes, you can indeed.
We're waiting for you, Mr. Kentridge. Thank you very much.
I hope I will be there in November next year.
Great. See you there then.
Good.